Welcome back, everyone, and a big warm hello to all the coin lovers, treasure hunters, and curious minds tuning in today, because you are about to hear a story that proves everyday pocket change can sometimes hide unbelievable secrets. And today's journey dives deep into one of the most fascinating what-if stories in modern American numismatics, the 1980p quarter dollar. A coin that most people have spent without a second thought, yet under the right circumstances, with the right combination of minting errors, metal anomalies, and rare production mistakes, this ordinary-looking quarter has been rumored, imagined, and theorized to reach values as high as $45 million. And whether you are a serious collector, a beginner checking change at home, or someone who simply loves incredible stories about money, this is one episode you will not want to miss, because the 1980 Philadelphia quarter exists at a crossroads of history, technology, and human error that makes the idea of a multi-million-dollar example not only exciting but also surprisingly plausible within the world of extreme numismatic rarities. And to understand how such a staggering value could even be discussed, we must start with the era itself, as 1980 was a time when the United States Mint was still adapting to the post-silver age, transitioning fully into copper-nickel-clad coinage while relying on massive high-speed presses, aging dies, and human oversight that sometimes failed under pressure. And the Philadelphia Mint, which struck the majority of quarters that year and did not use a mint mark, was producing coins at an enormous scale, increasing the statistical chance that something would go catastrophically wrong. And when errors happen in bulk production, most are minor and caught quickly, but once in a great while, a perfect storm of mistakes occurs, creating a coin that defies normal classification and becomes the stuff of legend, and one of the most talked about possibilities for a $45,001,980p quarter would involve a wrong planchet error combined with a transitional metal composition anomaly, meaning the coin was struck not on a standard copper-nickel-clad quarter planchet, but on a planchet intended for an entirely different denomination or even a different metal composition altogether, such as experimental alloys, foreign coin planchets, or leftover silver planchets that should not have been present in the mint at all. And while silver quarters officially ended in 1964, the mint has a documented history of experimental testing, retained materials, and planchet mix-ups that occasionally surface decades later. And if a genuine 1980p quarter were discovered struck on a solid silver or exotic alloy planchet with full mint state detail and flawless authentication, its value would already be astronomical. But the price could skyrocket even further if paired with additional striking errors, like an off-metal double strike, extreme off-center strike showing a full date and design, or a broad strike without a collar that dramatically altered the coin's dimensions. And collectors place extraordinary premiums on coins that show clear, dramatic evidence of mint error while remaining visually stunning, because the combination of error severity and eye appeal is incredibly rare. And then there is the holy grail of error collecting, the mule error, where a coin is struck using mismatched dies never intended to be paired together, such as a quarter obverse with a different denomination reverse or even a foreign design. And while mule errors are exceedingly rare, documented examples from other years have sold for hundreds of thousands or even millions. And if a confirmed 1980p quarter mule were discovered pairing the Washington quarter obverse with an experimental or unintended reverse die, especially one tied to a limited test or internal mint process, the numismatic world would erupt, pushing valuations into unprecedented territory, particularly if only one example were known, because uniqueness is one of the strongest drivers of extreme value. And beyond planchets and dies, die state errors themselves can elevate a coin into legendary status, especially if a quarter were struck using a severely misaligned die, a rotated die far beyond the normal tolerance, or a clash die that transferred ghost-like images from one side of the coin to the other in a dramatic and unmistakable way. And if that die were then used only briefly before being retired, producing just one or two surviving examples, the rarity factor would multiply exponentially, and even more intriguing is the concept of a double die error, which occurs during the hubbing process when the die receives multiple misaligned impressions, creating strong doubling in the lettering, date, or portrait, and while minor doubling is relatively common, extreme double dies with bold separation and strong visual impact are incredibly scarce, and if a 1980p quarter exhibited dramatic double die characteristics on both obverse and reverse, combined with other anomalies like incorrect metal composition or strike errors, it would represent a convergence of mistakes so unlikely that collectors and institutions alike would compete fiercely to own it, driving prices to levels that sound unbelievable to the average person. And condition plays a massive role in this story as well, because error coins that survive in circulated condition already command premiums, but an error coin preserved in pristine mint state, especially with full luster, sharp details, and no post-mint damage, becomes exponentially more valuable, and a hypothetical $45,001,980p quarter would almost certainly need to be in near-perfect condition, perhaps discovered in a sealed mint set, a forgotten vault, or a long-lost collection where it remained untouched for decades, and authentication would be absolutely critical, as such a coin would undergo intense scrutiny by multiple grading services, metallurgical testing, die analysis, and historical research to confirm its legitimacy, and once verified, the story behind the coin would become just as important as the coin itself, because provenance adds value, especially if the coin could be traced to a specific mint run, experimental batch, or documented error event. And another factor that fuels the idea of such extreme valuations is the global collector market, because today's numismatics is no longer limited to local coin shows, with wealthy collectors, museums, and investors around the world competing for trophy-level pieces. And when an item is truly one of a kind or represents an unrepeatable mistake in minting history, bidding wars can escalate rapidly, especially when prestige and legacy are at stake, and it is not unheard of for collectors to pay staggering sums for the right coin, not only as an investment, but as a symbol of status and passion. And while most 1980p quarters are worth face value, the magic of numismatics lies in the possibility that one coin out of millions could be different, hiding an error so profound that it rewrites expectations. And this is why collectors obsessively examine dates, edges, weights, strikes, and surfaces, because history has proven time and again that incredible rarities often begin as ordinary coins overlooked for years. And whether a $45,001,980p quarter exists today or remains a theoretical pinnacle of error collecting, the idea itself fuels the excitement that keeps the hobby alive, reminding us that every coin has a story, every minting process has the potential for human error, and every handful of change could hold a secret waiting to be discovered. And as you go about your day, remember that the next legendary find might already be in circulation, sitting quietly in a drawer, a jar, or a forgotten box, just waiting for someone curious enough to look a little closer and imagine the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. Next, 1981 $quarter USA coin. In today to the channel where hidden value meets history, because in this episode, we are diving into one of the most fascinating and mysterious modern coin stories ever discussed, the legendary 1981 Washington quarter dollar that has stunned the numismatic world with whispered valuations reaching an unbelievable $43 million, a coin most people have spent without a second thought, yet one that under the right circumstances could represent a life-changing discovery. And as we settle in together, I want you to imagine holding a simple quarter in your hand, the same size and weight you have seen thousands of times, yet carrying secrets created by rare minting mistakes, unusual production conditions, and extraordinary combinations of errors that transform a common coin into a once-in-a-lifetime prize. Because the story of the 1981 quarter is not about a single flaw, but about how multiple possibilities align at exactly the wrong moment at the mint, and exactly the right moment for collectors decades later, beginning with the historical context of 1981 when the United States Mint was under pressure from rising production demands, aging equipment, and a transition era in quality control, creating an environment where mistakes were more likely to slip through unnoticed, especially at the Denver Mint where the D Mint mark was applied. And during this time, quarters were struck on copper nickel-clad planchets that required precise alignment, exact pressure, and flawless timing to create a normal coin. But when any of these steps failed even slightly, the results could be dramatic, one of the most powerful contributors to extreme value being the possibility of a wrong planchet error where a quarter is struck on a planchet intended for another denomination or even another coinage program entirely, such as experimental alloy blanks or foreign planchets accidentally mixed into the supply, and if a genuine 1981 D quarter were confirmed on an incorrect metallic composition such as silver, aluminum, bronze, or a transitional test alloy, the uniqueness alone could propel it into the multi-million-dollar category, especially if the weight, edge, and electromagnetic signature verified the anomaly beyond any doubt. Another major factor that pushes the theoretical value into astonishing territory is the presence of dramatic double die errors, where the working die used to strike the coin received a misaligned impression from the hub, creating double design elements that are clearly visible to the naked eye, not the flat shelf-like doubling of machine doubling but strong rounded separation in the lettering of Liberty, the date 1981, In God We Trust, or the eagle details on the reverse. And when such doubling appears on both obverse and reverse in a single coin, the rarity multiplies exponentially, particularly when paired with the D Mint mark, which itself may show repunching or doubling. And then there is the possibility of an off-metal mule error where an obverse die intended for one coin is paired with a reverse die from another denomination or design, a scenario so rare that confirmed examples become instant legends. And if a 1981 D quarter were discovered with a mismatched reverse design or incorrect denomination pairing authenticated by top grading services, collectors would compete fiercely to own a piece of mint history that should never have existed, further increasing the potential value. And beyond die errors, the striking process itself offers opportunities for spectacular mistakes, including off-center strikes where a portion of the design is missing yet the date and mint mark remain visible, broad strikes where the collar fails causing the coin to spread wider than normal, and multiple strike errors where the coin is struck more than once in misaligned positions, creating overlapping images that look almost surreal. And while many off-center or broad strike coins are valuable, the combination of multiple striking errors on a single 1981 D quarter could elevate it to a level where it becomes a museum-grade specimen, especially if it escaped circulation in pristine condition, and condition is another critical element in the $43 million narrative, because a coin with all the right errors, but heavyware loses a significant portion of its appeal, whereas an uncirculated or proof-like error coin with sharp details, original luster, and minimal handling marks becomes an object of obsession for elite collectors. And this is where the concept of a perfect storm truly applies, since the most valuable coins are not just rare, they are visually stunning, historically significant, and preserved in exceptional condition. And adding yet another layer of intrigue is the potential for a missing clad layer error where the outer nickel layer is partially or completely absent, exposing the copper core beneath and creating a dramatic color contrast and weight difference. And if such a missing layer error occurred in combination with a double die or wrong planchet strike on a 1981 D quarter, the coin would be so anomalous that pricing it becomes almost impossible, allowing auction results to soar into uncharted territory. And we must also consider the role of authentication and provenance, because a coin valued at tens of millions would require verification by multiple experts, metallurgical analysis, die study comparisons, and a documented chain of custody. And once confirmed, the story of its discovery alone could fuel international media attention, driving competitive bidding among private collectors, investment funds, and institutions eager to secure a tangible piece of numismatic history. And while many people question whether a modern clad quarter could ever reach such heights, history shows that the market does not reward age alone, but uniqueness. And coins like the 1913 Liberty nickel or experimental mint errors prove that a single surviving example of the right mistake can eclipse even the rarest gold coins in value. And the 1981 D quarter sits at the crossroads of modern accessibility and hidden potential, because millions were minted yet only one coin with the right combination of errors could exist, quietly resting in a jar, drawer, or inherited collection waiting for discovery. And this possibility is what fuels the imagination of collectors worldwide, encouraging careful inspection of everyday change and reminding us that extraordinary value can hide in ordinary places. And as you listen to this story, it becomes clear that the $43 million figure represents not a guarantee, but the upper boundary of what is possible when rarity, error complexity, condition, and collector demand converge, making the 1981 D quarter dollar one of the most talked about what-if coins in modern American numismatics. A symbol of how mistakes made in seconds at the mint can echo across decades and transform a simple piece of pocket change into a legendary artifact that continues to inspire hope, curiosity, and the thrill of the hunt for everyone who believes that the next incredible discovery could be right there in their hand. Next, 1986 P quarter dollar USA coin. Today we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating modern U.S. quarters ever discussed among collectors, the 1986 P Washington quarter, a coin most people have spent without a second thought, yet one that under extraordinary circumstances has been whispered about as being worth up to $13 million because of rare minting errors, dramatic production mistakes, and once-in-a-generation combinations of flaws that turn an ordinary clad quarter into a legendary numismatic treasure. And to understand how such an astonishing valuation is even possible, we have to travel back to the mid-1980s, when the Philadelphia Mint was producing massive quantities of quarters for circulation, as the U.S. economy relied heavily on coinage for daily commerce, vending machines, parking meters, transit systems, and retail transactions. And in 1986, the Washington quarter was struck on copper-nickel-clad planchets, with a pure copper core sandwiched between two outer layers. Yet the sheer volume of coins being struck, the aging machinery, and the pressure to meet circulation demand created the perfect environment for minting anomalies, some subtle and some so dramatic that they defy conventional expectations. And collectors today understand that the most valuable coins are not just rare by date, but rare by circumstance, meaning a specific error had to occur at precisely the wrong moment during production. Inspection had to fail, and the coin had to escape into circulation or be preserved unknowingly for decades. And the 1986 P quarter sits right in the sweet spot where all of those variables intersect, starting with one of the most talked about possibilities, the double die error, which occurs when a coin die receives multiple misaligned impressions from the hub, resulting in double design elements. And while most people think of double dies as obvious to the naked eye, the truly valuable examples are often subtle yet widespread across critical areas such as the word liberty, the date 1986, the motto "I in God we trust," and even Washington's profile, where extra thickness, split serifs, or ghost-like shadows can be seen under magnification. And if an extreme double die obverse or reverse were discovered on a 1986 P quarter in pristine condition, especially one showing dramatic doubling across multiple devices, it would instantly become one of the most important modern quarter errors known, pushing values into the stratosphere as collectors compete not just for ownership, but for the prestige of holding a unique mint artifact. And then there is the legendary off-metal strike scenario, one of the rarest and most valuable mint errors possible, where a quarter is struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination or even a foreign coin. And imagine a 1986 P quarter struck on a silver planchet, a cent planchet, or an experimental alloy blank. producing a coin with incorrect weight, thickness, color, and acoustic properties, a coin that instantly fails every standard specification. And while such errors are almost always caught and destroyed, history has proven that a few slip through, and when they do, they rewrite price guides entirely, because collectors are no longer comparing apples to apples, but bidding on a one-of-a-kind anomaly. And in hypothetical or rumored cases where a quarter was struck on a 90% silver planchet left over from pre-1965 production, or on an experimental alloy being tested behind the scenes, the combination of modern date and obsolete metal would electrify the numismatic world. And then there's the dramatic and visually stunning broad strike error, where a coin is struck without the retaining collar that normally gives it its reeded edge and standard diameter, allowing the metal to flow outward under pressure, creating an oversized, flattened quarter with distorted lettering and expanded fields. And while minor broad strikes exist, a fully developed, sharply struck, untrimmed broad strike with strong detail and no edge reading could be so rare for a 1986 P quarter that it becomes a centerpiece coin for error specialists, especially if paired with other anomalies like doubling or misalignment. And speaking of misalignment, another major value driver is the misaligned die strike, where the obverse and reverse designs are not properly centered relative to each other, creating a coin where the design appears shifted dramatically toward one edge, sometimes even cutting off letters or parts of Washington's portrait. And extreme misalignments that still show full dates and mint marks are particularly valuable because they demonstrate just how far the machinery deviated from normal operation while still striking a recognizable coin. And the greater the visual impact, the higher the collector demand. And then we come to the rare but devastating clipped planchet errors, which occur when a coin blank is improperly cut from the metal strip, leaving a curved or straight missing section, and when such a clip is large, clean, and clearly mint-made rather than post-mint damage, it adds a layer of intrigue and value, especially if the coin also shows the characteristic Blakesley effect opposite the clip, proving its authenticity. And a large, well-defined clipped 1986 P quarter in mint state condition would already be worth significant money. But when combined with other errors it enters legendary territory. And beyond these mechanical errors, there are surface and strike anomalies like die cracks, die breaks, and retained cut errors, where chunks of the die break away and fill with metal during striking, creating raised blobs or missing sections in the design. And while small die cracks are common and often ignored, massive retained cuts that distort Washington's head, the eagle on the reverse, or the legends around the rim are highly collectible, especially when they represent an early or dramatic stage of die failure, telling a story frozen in metal of a die literally tearing itself apart under pressure. And the story grows even more compelling when we consider the possibility of a wrong design strike, where a coin is struck using a die intended for another year or even another denomination, a scenario so rare it borders on myth, yet documented cases exist. And if a 1986 P quarter were ever authenticated showing mismatched obverse and reverse designs from different series or years, it would instantly become one of the most valuable error coins ever recorded, because it would represent a catastrophic breakdown in mint procedures. And then there is the enigmatic category of missing clad layer errors, where one of the outer nickel layers fails to bond properly to the copper core, resulting in a coin that appears copper-colored on one side or unusually light in weight. And while partial layer loss is known, a fully missing clad layer on a well-preserved 1986 P quarter would be extraordinarily rare and visually striking, especially if the remaining design detail is strong and uncorroded, making it a perfect storm of error type, condition, and eye appeal. And condition itself cannot be overstated in its importance, because while many error coins exist in circulated states, the coins that achieve record-shattering values are those preserved in mint state or proof-like condition, showing minimal contact marks, original luster, and sharp details. And a flawless or near-perfect error quarter tells collectors that not only did the error escape detection, but it also avoided decades of wear, abuse, and environmental damage, a survival story that adds emotional weight to its value. And when such a coin is professionally authenticated and graded by a top-tier grading service, encapsulated, photographed, and published, it enters the realm of investment-grade numismatics, where wealthy collectors, museums, and institutions compete not just for metal, but for history, and this is where speculative valuations like $13 million enter the conversation, not because every 1986 P quarter is worth that amount, but because in the theoretical presence of a unique, undisputed, visually dramatic, multi-error specimen in top condition, the sky becomes the limit, and history supports this idea when we look at other legendary coins like the 1913 Liberty nickel, the 1943 copper cent, or the 1974 aluminum cent, coins that were never supposed to exist yet now command prices that once seemed impossible, and the psychology of collecting plays a huge role here, because collectors are driven not just by scarcity but by narrative, by the idea that they are holding something that defied the system, something that slipped through the cracks of a massive industrial operation, and the 1986 P quarter, humble and modern as it may seem, is a perfect canvas for such a story, because millions were struck, errors were inevitable, and only a handful of the most extreme examples would ever survive, making the hunt itself part of the allure, and that's why collectors are encouraged to check their change, examine old coin jars, revisit childhood collections, and look closely at every detail, because history has shown time and time again that extraordinary discoveries are often made by ordinary people who simply took a closer look, and while most 1986 P quarters will be worth face value, the possibility, however remote, that one could harbor a combination of errors capable of rewriting numismatic history is what keeps collectors searching, studying, and dreaming, and that sense of possibility is the true engine of the hobby. The idea that a simple quarter could represent not just money but mystery, craftsmanship gone wrong, and the enduring human fascination with rarity, and as long as coins continue to circulate and stories continue to surface, the legend of error coins, like the 1986 P quarter, will only grow, reminding us that sometimes the greatest treasures are hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes to recognize their worth. Last 1984 D quarter dollar USA coin. A huge warm welcome to all the new viewers tuning in today to the Coins Explorer, the place where everyday pocket change transforms into extraordinary treasure stories. And in this deep dive we are exploring one of the most fascinating and talked about modern coin legends in American numismatics, the 1984 D Washington quarter dollar that has captured collector imagination with whispers, records, rumors, and theoretical valuations reaching as high as $11 million. And while that number sounds unbelievable at first glance, by the time this journey ends you will understand how a simple copper nickel-clad coin struck at the Denver Mint during the mid-1980s could, under very specific and extraordinarily rare circumstances, rise from a face value of just 25 cents into a multi-million-dollar artifact that serious collectors would battle fiercely to own. Because coin value is never about age alone, it is about condition, rarity, historical context, and most importantly, errors and minting mistakes that were never supposed to exist. And the 1984 D quarter sits at a unique intersection of all of these factors, starting with the era itself when the United States Mint was producing quarters in enormous numbers to meet everyday commerce needs, often running presses at extremely high speeds, which increased the probability of striking anomalies slipping through unnoticed, especially at the Denver Mint where quality control sometimes prioritized quantity over microscopic inspection, creating the perfect environment for dramatic errors such as double dies, off-metal strikes, wrong planchets, die clashes, die breaks, misalignments, missing clad layers, and experimental alloy mishaps. And when these errors occur in isolation, they can already be valuable, but when multiple anomalies combine on a single coin and survive in pristine uncirculated or proof-like condition, the resulting piece can become a once-in-a-generation discovery, and that is where the theoretical $11 million valuation begins to make sense, because collectors do not pay for common coins, they pay for impossibilities, coins that challenge the rules of minting itself. And one of the most sought-after possibilities for the 1984 D quarter is a dramatic double die obverse or reverse, especially one showing extreme doubling on Washington's profile, the motto "I in God we trust," or the date itself, where the doubling is not machine doubling but true hub doubling created when a die receives multiple misaligned impressions from the hub, resulting in bold, separated secondary images that are clearly visible to the naked eye. And if such a double die were paired with a near-perfect MS68 or higher condition with blazing original luster and no signs of circulation, collectors would immediately recognize it as a top-tier rarity. But the story grows even more compelling when we consider wrong planchet errors, because the mid-1980s were a time when multiple denominations were being struck simultaneously, and a quarter accidentally struck on a planchet intended for a foreign coin, a silver planchet, or even an experimental alloy could produce a coin with the wrong weight, wrong color, and wrong metallic composition, and if metallurgical testing confirmed a unique or undocumented alloy, especially one tied to a transitional or experimental phase, the numismatic world would take notice instantly, because unique wrong planchet quarters have historically sold for staggering amounts, and when combined with a key date and mint like 1984 D, which already has a reputation for weaker strikes and production quirks, the value potential skyrockets. And then there are off-center strikes where the design is dramatically misaligned yet still shows a full date and mint mark, creating a visually stunning error that collectors love. But again, value multiplies when that off-center strike also exhibits other anomalies such as a broad strike with no reading, partial collar engagement, or a rotated die where the reverse is misaligned by a dramatic degree, sometimes as much as 180 degrees, making the coin feel almost unreal in hand. And another powerful driver behind the multi-million-dollar narrative is the possibility of missing clad layer errors, where either the copper core or one of the nickel-clad layers fails to bond properly, leaving one side of the coin with a smooth copper appearance or a thinner than normal profile. And when these errors occur, they are instantly recognizable and highly collectible, but extremely few survive in top grade because the exposed copper is vulnerable to damage. So finding a flawless example would be nothing short of miraculous, and miracles are exactly what multi-million-dollar coins are made of, because they are not just rare, they are uniquely rare, one of one, with no comparable example known to exist. And then there is the phenomenon of major die breaks and cuts, where the die itself begins to fracture and collapse, leaving large raised blobs of metal on the struck coin, sometimes obscuring parts of the design or creating dramatic shapes that tell the story of a die literally failing under pressure. And when a cud forms over the date or mint mark, it can transform an otherwise common coin into a legendary error, especially if the cud is large, well-defined, and visually striking. And the 1984 D quarter is known among specialists for having several minor die break varieties, which fuels speculation that a major undiscovered example could still be hiding in a collection, a bankroll, or an estate, waiting to be recognized. And that brings us to condition rarity, a concept often misunderstood by casual collectors, because while millions of 1984 D quarters were struck, very few were preserved in gem condition, as this was not a year that collectors actively saved rolls in large numbers, meaning that finding a truly pristine example today is surprisingly difficult. And when you combine a high grade with a spectacular error, the value does not add, it multiplies, because the buyer is not just purchasing an error, they are purchasing the best known example of that error, a coin that could dominate auction headlines and redefine price expectations. And that is how valuations can leap from thousands to hundreds of thousands. then to millions, as competitive bidding, media attention, and collector psychology collide. And speaking of psychology, the allure of owning something no one else can own plays a massive role in these extreme prices, because ultra-high-end collectors are not motivated by utility or even traditional investment logic. They are motivated by legacy, by the idea that their collection will be remembered, studied, and referenced for generations, and a legendary 1984 quarter with unprecedented errors would fit perfectly into that narrative, especially if it were certified by a top grading service with detailed attribution, photographic documentation, and a population report showing it as unique. And the market has repeatedly shown that when a coin checks all of these boxes, price ceilings become meaningless, because the only real limit is how badly the top two bidders want it. And history has proven time and again that when pride, prestige, and passion enter the auction room, numbers that once seemed impossible suddenly become reality. And while skeptics rightly point out that not every 1984 quarter is worth a fortune, that skepticism is actually part of what makes the hunt so thrilling, because the vast majority are indeed worth face value, yet the tiny fraction that deviate from the norm hold the power to change lives, and that possibility keeps collectors searching rolls, inspecting change, and examining inherited collections with magnification and hope. And it is also important to understand that the $11 million figure represents a theoretical peak based on a perfect storm scenario, a unique combination of extreme errors, flawless condition, documented provenance, and intense collector demand, rather than a typical market price. But numismatics is filled with examples where theory became reality when the right coin met the right moment, and the 1984 quarter remains one of those tantalizing candidates because it comes from a modern era where errors are still being discovered, knowledge is still evolving, and new finds can still shock the hobby. And that is why experts encourage collectors to learn the diagnostics, understand the minting process, and look closely at what they already own, because value is often hiding in plain sight, disguised as something ordinary, waiting for someone curious enough to ask the right questions. And as we reflect on the journey of this humble quarter from pocket change to potential multimillion-dollar icon, it becomes clear that its story is not just about money, it is about curiosity, patience, and the thrill of discovery, the idea that history can be held in your hand, and that mistakes, rather than perfection, often create the most extraordinary outcomes. And that is what makes coin collecting endlessly fascinating, because every coin has a story, but only a few have the power to rewrite what we believe is possible. And the legend of the 1984 quarter dollar, with its errors, mistakes, and remarkable possibilities, stands as a powerful reminder that sometimes the smallest objects carry the biggest surprises. And that is exactly why we keep exploring, searching, and sharing these stories together here on the Coins Explorer.